Now, South Australian Police will now be trialling the use of approximately 150 mobile fingerprint scanning devices across the state at a cost of $2.6 million. This adds to 29 mobile scanners already in use in police stations in this state. Now, Police Minister O'Brien has claimed that once the trial is complete, the Labor government will consider drafting legislation to allow it to be used in a more widespread way. But an Advertiser report from February 5 this year quotes Attorney General Rao as saying Parliament had recently passed laws to allow more people to be fingerprinted in the street using mobile scanners. Police argue that the technology saves valuable police time. In the space of 90 seconds, they can verify who somebody is, whether they have warrants, outstanding criteria, rather than have to take a suspect to the station to use the static fingerprint detection technology at the police station. Now, in one jurisdiction, it's reportedly led to detecting a homicide suspect. While this trial is voluntary, that is, you only have to provide your fingerprint when asked, some civil liberties advocates argue that a police officer asking you for a fingerprint is not really voluntary, since you could otherwise be told, come down to the police station if you don't comply. Now, police say the fingerprints are not retained, but some aren't satisfied by that. These devices are in use in New South Wales, the UK, and in Arizona, USA, and that's attracted similar concerns in those jurisdictions. Something else worth considering is that technology companies like Apple, now this is what you may not know, are considering shifting to fingerprint scanning as your password. So in future, your fingerprint might mean a whole lot more than the old inkblot record on a police database. Now, I'm interested to hear your thoughts. Before we go to a former police minister, I want to pick the brain of a guy who has been in his career both a serving police officer and now a senior lawyer, Michael Woods. Michael, what's your view on this?
Yeah, well, Leon, it's like most things, it seems to be putting the cart before the horse. One of my mottos, and I know we promote it on our website, is that we protect your rights. But if we keep going in this way, I don't think there's going to be any rights to protect that are left. We are turning into a state of Big Brother. I did read the articles on this fingerprinting, and I can guarantee you a few things. The first is that the Commissioner would not be trialling it unless they were going to consider and be promoting that it turn into legislation. The second is the voluntariness will turn into compulsoriness. There is no doubt about that, like every other piece of legislation that starts off and then eats into your rights further. I get quite surprised that as a community we don't do more to stand up. The reason being often is the catch cry that's used against us all is that, oh, if you've done nothing wrong, you've got nothing to hide. Well, that's not the right excuse. They might as well microchip us all and send us through with scanners to work out where we've done, because that would probably save some crime too. I've got some concerns about it, I really do. I noticed it was justified about saying that, well, the police spend a lot of time and resources when someone gives a false name. But I don't really see the logic in this argument for a trial, because if a person gave a false name without identity and they didn't have anything at the scene to identify themselves, there'd be nothing to stop me if, when the police next get me for jaywalking, giving the name Leon Byner, and my fingerprints can be registered against your name. I wonder how that's going to go later when you get charged with something and there's a real mix-up. And the second aspect of that, Leon, which I think is odd to justify, is that the police talk at the moment about a lack of resources and frontline policing. Do you know how many person hours this is going to take to start taking fingerprints and enter that into a database so that Big Brother has collected further information on all of its citizens, when the real fact of the matter is that 99% of the time it won't ever come to be used, and they'll justify it on the 1 or 2% that have done something wrong.
What do you say to the public of South Australia who will say, look, I respect the cops, I don't get into trouble, I mean well, I'm not a violent person, I don't do the wrong thing, I don't have anything to worry about?
Well, that's right. And you know what it'll do? It'll be this reverse thing. Someone then will be pulled over. They won't have identity on them. They will then refuse to give their fingerprints. And what will happen is the police will then say, oh, that seems suspicious, they won't give me their fingerprints, so I better arrest them on reasonable cause to suspect that they've given a false name. So it's going to work against the citizen again, just on the fact that they don't want to use their rights. But this is part of a wider plan, Leon, and, you know, I know my profession is outraged at the moment. We now go to the remand centre, and as professionals to visit clients at the remand centre, we are not allowed in unless we have an iris scan before they will let us in. It's getting to the stage where Big Brother is watching us every single thing we do, and no one is prepared to draw the line on these things.
So you don't think it'll make Adelaide a safer place for the police to identify known felons or get their matching in order so that they can make a quick prosecution or arrest?
But they've always done that. A known felon is arrested. They've had their fingerprints taken. Their fingerprints are on the database. What they're going to say is that, and it nicely that it starts out that the way of, oh, look, we'll make it voluntary. It's not. As I said, microchipping people seriously would. We could microchip every citizen in this state, have a database GPS downloaded. They could link into a GPS point where a crime occurred and find out exactly what citizens were at that GPS point. That would actually save a lot of crime too. But would we be outraged about that? Well, probably this week we would. But you know what? In a few years we probably won't because we're apathetic.
Well, there's Michael Woods, senior lawyer at Woods & Co.